thank you that I'm invited here and that I can share my perspectives on investigative journalism and some tools I use. And first of all, I have to say this is a very special day because 13 years ago I made my first story about the Austrian finance minister Karl-Heinz Krasser, and today we broke the story that he will be indicted because of bribery. So this is sometimes you need 13 years of investigation to come to an end. So it's a very special day, but I'm not talking about white-collar corruption, not in the first 30 minutes. My workshop will have two parts. I will tell you about old-school techniques, how we can find a story that is literally happened on the street. And in the second part, I will tell you about, I think, the future of investigative journalism, which is collaboration, which is internationalization for big stories. I will give you a short insight into the Panama paper investigation. I think this is maybe when we fixed this lecture, I couldn't tell you that I'm involved in this, but I think it might be interesting for you to see how a crowd of 400 journalists worked on this issue. And I have some stuff here. So first of all, maybe I may ask you a question. What is an investigative journalist? Can anybody give me an answer? Every journalist. I don't think that Wolfgang Fellner is an investigative journalist. What's an investigative journalist? What's the difference between a daily news reporter and an investigative journalist?
Somebody who finds things out that people want hidden and don't want answered.
Yes. It's hidden. Time, I'm not sure if it is time. Some stories are very quick.
He made the news.
He made, yes, maybe. A teacher of mine, his name is Mark Lee Hunter. He's one of the most famous teachers in investigative journalism. He made this scenario. Can you see this, everybody? So this is a round and this is an arrow. This is daily news business and this is investigative journalism. What does it mean? The daily news guy is sitting in an endless circle of information. It never ends. And he's bombarded by a lot of information from public relations, from press officers, from, I don't know, other newspapers. And he's just sitting here and he can just manage this information. And his story has never a beginning or an end. He's the guy at the Austrian press agency. He's the guy who makes the ticker at an online standard or whatever. The investigative reporter is a guy who is telling you a story with a beginning and an end. And it is not only, this story has not only an end, it has a subjective goal. He wants reform. He wants things to change. He's not neutral. This is the big difference to this guy. This guy always is neutral, or he pretends to be neutral. Of course, he's not because he's selecting all these errors. This guy, I would say, is not neutral. I'm not neutral on the topic of prison systems, of corruption, of, police brutality. I want to reform the society, and I want to get the information that society is hiding from me. So what I have to do is to pick up information that is that is objective, that you can prove, and you work like a public prosecutor. You have to collect evidence to come to an end. What's another difference? The difference is that this guy is an expert, and this guy can never be an expert because every day he has another story. This guy is an expert. He's writing books. He's being interviewed by other journalists. This guy tries to talk to his sources on a level of experts. He always knows about his issues he's talking about. This guy never can be an expert. Another very important difference is that this guy trusts in his sources. When a police officer gives an interview to a daily news reporter, this guy normally trusts that the information is true. This guy never trusts. Never. The only thing that is important for this guy is if the information he's using is correct or not. So let me bring an example. I did a story on a 14-year-old boy who was shot by police in a supermarket because he was, during the night, he was breaking into the supermarket, he was a burglar, and police shot him. And the police officer said that he was shot in defense, in self-defense. But the second guy who saw the crime said, no, this was not self-defense. The 14-year-old boy just ran away and he was shot into the back and he had no weapon at all. So this 16-year-old Romanian underprivileged boy who was already sitting in prison, he will never come into an interview here. And when he gives an interview to a daily news reporter, normally they would say, well, we don't know if it's true. This guy has to check if it is true what this guy says. And then he can be one of the most important sources of this guy. So it's not important how many stars you have on your shoulder, but if the information you give to me is true or not. Another thing is that this arrow, our goal has to be that this arrow is going to this circle. And when we get this here and we come to a daily newspaper, we have one. How can we do it? I will show you in 5 minutes. I'll show another explanation of what is an investigative journalist. Investigative journalists are dogs. I always use this for my students when I tell them all journalists are dogs. Investigative journalists are a special species of dogs. I try to explain it. When I studied journalism at Profil, this is a weekly magazine, they sent me to Lassing. Lassing was a little village in Styria where Bergwerk, a mine was breaking in, and I was sent there to this village, and you see the whole village was like collapsing, and I made a very interesting experience there because I saw a very different kind of journalists. At the first day, there were those guys from the local press. They had their microphone, and they were like acting as a Mikrofonständer? A microphone stand. So they said, how do you feel, Mr. Mayor? Can you tell us about your feelings? What happened? Often they are very close to each other. In the worst scenario, those guys are called, I always tell it to my students, they're the lab dogs. So this is a kind of police reporting we often see in Austria. You're embedded. You are friends. You see it in sport journalism in Austria. They're very close. They play tennis together. On the second day, the guys that were coming there were those guys from Bild-Zeitung or RTL. Let's call them the street mutts, the hyenas. Those were those guys who were knocking on the doors of the widows of the dead workers, and you can see them. Former times when we had the film photography, they had those belts where they put in their film rolls, and they looked like warriors. You know? And they always used this press sign on the cars, and they always take care of those guys. And there was a third group or a third race of dogs coming there. There was the guys of the Spiegel magazine, and they did something very different. They didn't chat with the mayors, and they didn't knock on the doors of the widows of the dead workers. They come in, and the first thing they did was they posed a question. They asked a question, or they constructed a thesis. And the thesis was the Republic of Austria responsible of the death of 10 workers? This was something very different. And those guys we called the watchdogs. Why do I use the terminus watchdog? It's a terminus from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, who used this word, the public watchdog. It says the free press is the public watchdog of democracy. It was branded in the case Sunday Times versus the United Kingdom, where the Sunday Times wrote about the Contagan trials. You know, Contagan was this medicine who deformed babies. And there was a gag order against the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Times was not allowed to write about these trials because of contempt of court. In German, it's like Verletzung der Unschuldsvermutung. And the European Court of Human Rights said, no, you cannot give the press a gag order because the free press is here to bring information, that people can receive information and to send information that is shocking, that is disturbing, and the free press is the watchdog of democracy. So what the Spiegel guys did, they tried to play a very important role in controlling the state authorities. Let's see how it works. I want to show you the case of Shebani Wague, because we can learn a lot of things in this case. Shebani Wague was an African student living in Vienna, and he worked there was some kind of festival at the Wiener Stadtpark, and there was some kind of fight with some friends of him in the street, and somebody called the police, and Shebani Wague was arrested. And the police put him on the floor, and he died. And then the next day in the Lapdog press, the Kronenzeitung, was written that he had a heart attack. So he died because of a heart attack. This poor guy, the police wanted to bring him to the hospital, but he died. And the African community in Vienna, they already organized a demonstration because they said this was murder. It was another kind of racism and racist police abuse. So what our job was to find out what happened. And I want to show it how I found out, because this case was important afterwards in the education of policemen. So how can we find out what is happening? We only have the Kronenzeitung and the information that somebody happened here. What would you do now? You have 2 days, 3 days to make a feature. What would you do now? How can you find them? How can you find the African community? Which doctor? Hmm? Yeah. The first thing I would do is to make a thesis. My teacher in investigative journalism, Mark Lee Hunter, is a big fan of thesis-driven investigative journalism. Since the first thing is to say, what is our question? What do we want to investigate? And a thesis is not the headline of a story. We don't have to mix it up. A thesis is, what's the reason we investigate? And the thesis in this story for me was, Austrian police is killing Africans. This is not the headline. This is the reason why I do an investigation. If this guy would have had a white collar, maybe he would be alive. This is the thing I want to investigate. So, what are we doing now? What would you do?
So the people who organized the demonstration.
Yeah, but
See what they know, who they would suggest to talk about.
Let's try to make it in steps, 6 steps. Step 1, making a hypothesis. I told you. Why is a story important? Are people suffering? Do state authorities function? Are there other citizens affected? Do we need reform? Those are the questions I would pose. That's what I told to the thesis. The second step would be the verification process. So what I would do is go there. If somebody dies, normally we had it last week at the Brunnenmarkt. There was a woman who was killed. So the first thing I would do is not to go to Facebook or Twitter or to anybody. I would go there because normally when some people die, you have a memorial, people coming there in the morning, and they pray there. So what I did was going there and talking to the neighbors. What did you see? It's it's very simple, actually. So I went to the house who was on the opposite side, and I asked the people, what did you see? And the people don't see it. One guy just filmed it. So this is reporter's luck. But I swear you, in 99% of the cases, you have reporter's luck. Last week, when I went to the Brunnenmarkt, there was a murder, and it was interesting to know how was the role of the police. And when I went there, where this woman was killed, I met the policeman who found the dead woman. He was standing there and putting on a candle. So I talked to him. It was very easy to get to him. You need no press officer and no authorization of a ministry. I just talked to this policeman, and we went to a coffee. I gave him a protection, so he was anonymous. I didn't use his name, but he told me the whole story about the murderer, about the victim. It was very, very easy to go there. And I have the feeling that in all these data journalism and social media investigations we do, we often forget to go there. So what I did, I went there. And there was a guy who made a video. He said, I made a video. So what would you do now? Look at the video. Where would you look at the video? Next to him. Why? Yes, and why? What's the next reason you do it when you do a feature? You walk into his apartment. You come very close to him. You can see what guy is he? Is he a left wing? Is he a left leaning social worker, or is he a right wing football fan? Or you don't know, yeah. But this can be very interesting for his story. Maybe you cut it away. I don't know. But it's interesting to go into his apartment, take place at his sofa. Try to make it very, very near. It's a different. It's maybe you behave a little bit like a lapdog now. Come close to him, but you're still a watchdog. You take the costume of a sheep to come in. So what I did is I told him my phrase always is, "Hello, my name is Florian Klenk. I'm investigating this story because of this reason. Can you help me? Can you share your information with me? Not what do you say. Can you help me?" And this is like a magic key because most people want to help you and most people want to share information with you. So I said, "Can you help me? Can you share information?" I said, "Yes, come in and let's watch the video." So let's watch the video. I hope it works. Can you see it? There was no tone on it. Let's look at it. Okay, we can stop it here. 1 second. So, what did we see?
Looks like he's alive.
What would you do now? We're sitting now on the sofa of this guy, he's showing us this video. What's the next step? Yeah. I tell you what I felt. I was a little bit disappointed because I expected some kind of Rodney King case, some kind of torture or fight or beating or something. But it was very calm.
It looks at the start like he's already dead because they're not in any hurry. And then he springs to life and they just treat him like an animal.
I tell you how I felt, and I often feel when I see things like this. I feel like an urban person in a jungle. I don't see anything. It confuses me. And there was one journalist, he's now the one of the most important journalists at Kronenzeitung. He said, well, there's nothing to see. You see a person lying on the floor and they take him and put him into the car and there's nothing to see. And Elfriede Jelinek, the famous Nobel Prize winner, said, you see das Nichtstun, you see they do nothing. And I think those are the two, this is the difference between an investigative journalist and a daily news guy. You see that they do nothing. But how can we find out what they have to do? So what are we doing now? What's the first thing you do? We're sitting on the sofa. What are we doing now? Very easy. You take the video. So that nobody else is getting it. It's your story. And you have to make breaking news because somebody has to pay and your readers have to pay for it. So first thing is you take this video. You need time now. Always keep it in mind. If somebody else is getting it, or if the police is getting it, maybe they tell another story, or they try to take it away from you. So take the video, and I made a deal with this guy. I said, please don't tell anybody. I need 2 weeks now, or 1 week of investigation to find out what is happening there. So how can we find out what is happening there? What would you do? They won't tell you anything. Probably they would say, well, how can we find the family?
How do you know who is the guy?
Try and identify somebody in the video, the guy standing in
Yeah,
the
you have to find out the name of this person. If you have good luck, you find the wife of this person. It's much easier. This was 2003. There was no Facebook, no YouTube, no Twitter. It's much easier now because you can try to make a call in Facebook and tell the people to call you, which I did. What I did last week, and normally it works. But you have to find a relative. Why do you have to find a relative?
Because they get access
To the files. Yeah. This is something especially young journalists don't know, that relatives and victims and people have access to the files. Most stories, from the murder case to corruption case to all these cases, are only possible to write about because we have access to the court files. And the police is doing our work. They make interviews with all the people we are not allowed to interview in this time. They can interview the policemen, the doctors, the victims. They can make photos. They can videotape. They can wiretap. What else? And if you get the file, if you get a copy of this file, a lot of work is done for you. Especially if you work for radio, you can use this stuff for whatever. No, but I can read it and I can see what they did. If they make a good investigation or if they forget to do things. Especially in corruption case, you always see what is not happening. Did they open the bank accounts of people? Did they investigate? And did they ask quick enough? So if you read a police file, you can see if the state is fit for investigating this. So the first thing is to try to get a copy of the file. So you try to find the widow, you try to find the lawyer of the widow, and try to get a copy of it. What I do often is that I contact people. and ask them if they need a lawyer. Like 2 or 3 months ago, I made a story about a guy who killed himself in prison, and he was in an isolation cell, and he shouldn't have been there because he was sick, and he was a case for the doctor, but they put him in the basement, and I want to read his files. So what did I do? I just Googled his name. I found the what's the Patezettel, if somebody, when you die, you have this. Yeah, I found this, so I saw the name of his family members, and I wrote an email to them, and I said, well, my name is Florian Klenk, I want to investigate the conditions in prison, and if you have the same interest in me, please contact me. So I didn't call them. I just gave them the possibility to call me. And within 1 hour, they called me. And I said, well, I can organize you a lawyer you have not to pay for, and my interest is to get the files, to read it, and maybe we have the same interest. It was the same stuff as The Guardian did in a murder case. I talked to David Legler, I think, or Nick Davis was the guy who made the Guardian case, and he made the same. He found out that the Sunday Times was using detectives and to spy on people, so he looked for a victim, and I think it was a famous victim, and he said to the victim, well, I need access to the file of the murder investigations. That was the trick to get on the file. So it's very easy, actually. But sometimes you have to be active. You cannot just report on the things that happen. You have to be active, and you have to organize how to get on the information. So, what did I do? Step one was the hypothesis. Step 2 was the verification process. So what I'm doing is go out. The doors are open. Read the laws. Read studies about this case. When we looked at this case, we want to know if it's correct how they treated him. How can we find out? Very simple. We can read in medical journals how do you fix a person who is in a psychotic situation. It's very easy. And if you Google that, you will find out that it is not normal to put this person on the floor because he can suffocate. It's very easy. Show this video to experts. When you stand in the jungle and you're an urban person, you need a guide, and this guide will show you things you never see. So I went to a doctor, and he said, the scandal in this video is not that they stand on him. The scandal is this here. This is the scandal, because he's the doctor, and he has his hand in his pockets. And he should put his hands on the nose and the mouth of the person lying on the floor. And he doesn't, for minutes. So this is the scandal. I never would have been an idea that this guy is responsible for the whole death. It's not this. This looks terrible because he puts his feet on the leg of Sebani Wag. So you need experts who show you what's the real scandal in the story. Very important is get statistics, read books about stories like this, read your colleagues' works, and read the reports of NGOs. So this is public sources, using public sources. Step 3, as I told you, is look for human sources. Look for the victims, look for the experts. I love retired experts. Why? Because they have a lot of time to meet you. Nobody suspects them. And they have a lot of knowledge about the organization you write about. So when you want to get into an institution, a prison, a school, a hospital, a party, whatever, North Korea, Islamic States, look for the people who left this organization. I'm sure you can do a very, very good feature on the Islamic State by just interviewing people who lived there and who live now in Austria. If you go to a colleague of mine, Sibylle Hammond, made a story about North Korea because she just stood at the border of China and North Korea and she just interviewed the people leaving from this totalitarian institution. It's very easy. You don't have always to come in. Wait for the people to come out, retired people. And they love to talk because they know everything better than the younger generation. And often they really do. Another thing is go to the Great Barrier Reefs of information. What do I mean? If you want to be an expert or if you want to have sources, try to go to seminars. Where do those people you're interested in meet? I often go to, what is a Kamingespräch? Like evening talks of public prosecutors. I can tell you there's nothing more boring than going there, but often there's this one guy who wants to tell you a story, or can give you information you need, or the guy you take the address of and you can call 2 years later. Can you remember we met in front of the fire in this old hotel in Salzburg? It was very boring, but we met each other. Yes, please help me. One thing that is very, very important, especially in times of digitalization, is to protect your sources, the people you talk with. Most of the people you talk with are not allowed to talk in public. So what you have to do is, first of all, protect them of themselves. Because a person who is talking to a journalist is very broad, that he moves things. So tell him not to talk about it. Mr. Bradley, who broke the cable gates, he talked about it, and he was caught. Protect them from yourself. Don't talk about this guy. Protect them from their chiefs, their enemies, their colleagues. Often you have to protect a source from the public, because often whistleblowers are not fit enough to stand in the public, to talk. Often they have psychiatric problems. Often they are weak persons in the system who can stand a scandal. So try to protect him. And never do what we call a one-night stand of information. So always think that you come back, that you look in the eye of this person who shared information to you. It's very important. Always stay fair and trustworthy. Next step, be organized. I just talked to a colleague who said we made an investigation and there was so much stuff and we were overwhelmed of information. This is one of the biggest problems we have. It's not that we have not enough information, it's that we have too much information. So organization is a very, very important point. I often see my colleagues when I come into the room, I see those tables who were overwhelmed by papers and it's always in chaos, and journalists are creative persons and they like I'm different. I'm very spießig. What's spießig in English? I'm a lawyer. You could say conservative. Yeah, conservative. I'm very so. I always try to keep the things in organization. So what do? I have protocols of my interviews. I have a database on my computer where I can find everything very quickly. I have a personal archive with articles. I have files, not digital files, analog file, where I put all stuff that I can find it. I have a very, very good organized address book, so I can find every expert within minutes. And one of the most important things is when you start to write or to cut or whatever your story, try to make chronology. Often this is, if you're overwhelmed by information, chronology is often the easiest way to tell a story. Follow your toes. Often this is working, and you can change it afterwards. But often the chronology is the easiest way to tell the story. Every fairy tale has a chronology. You don't start with Snow White dying, and then you come back and tell the story of the witches. You start with the birth of Snow White, and you stop when she's dead, or not really dead. She's married. Next step, very, very important to know. The author has the authority to weigh the information. Don't just tell a boring story. Don't just give people information. Tell a story. Find a hero. Find a victim. Find an ambivalent person who is maybe victim and hero in one person. Try to sharpen your thesis. Try to make constructive journalism. So tell your readers or listeners, show them a way out. Show them a best practice example. When we do the story in Shebanivago, who is dying in the streets because the police was not able to fix him in the way they should, We tell the people about America and Germany, where those cases happened 10 years ago and where they have new regulations. And it makes your story even better if you show that in other states the problem was solved. 2 years ago I made a story about juvenile prisons, and we made a story about Sweden and told the Austrians how the Swedish did it, or the Swiss. So try to be constructive, not do just an indictment, try to be constructive. Very important is the quality control, is the step 6. If you have a plan, what does it mean? Do fact checking, please. Every single fact should be checked, even a name, the age of a person. It's the most embarrassing thing when you have a big investigation about, let's say, Herbert Kickl and the Kickl Papers. He's a famous politician. I did a story, and you don't write Herbert Kickl, but Peter Kickl. Yeah, they say, well, you can't even write my name correctly. So what can we tell about history? So, in the age of social media, every single mistake is a problem for you. We left the time of readers' letters where we make an erratum or an error, but try to check it. The second important thing is let other people listen or read your piece. When my grandmother was alive, she always had to listen to my stories. Really, it's not a joke. I was sitting there and I read the story to my grandmother, and I realized the moment when she fell asleep. Yeah? This was the moment where the story got boring, yeah? Or where she said, well, now I lost your story. Yeah? This is very important. And never be a diva. Very important. We have so many divas, or divus. What's the male form of a diva? An alpha, whatever. So kill your darlings. If you think some formulation is very, very good and it's so great and you are so poetic and creative, kill it. Yeah? Be simple when you are investigative. Don't start to make big pictures and I think a good feature and a good report and a good story is very, very simple, very down to earth. Try that everybody understands it. What I do is I send all quotes to the people that are affected before I publish it. It's very important because this is a principle of fairness, and often you can attack people very, very harsh, but if they know it before publication, they're not so bad. But when they read it, it's an interesting thing because they have the chance to respond to it before, and they know what will be happening. I often send a whole piece to this person. I said, this is the piece that will be published tomorrow. What do you think about it? And often they find little mistakes that are important for them. The age, or a little quotation that is not important for a whole report, but it's important for this person. And you can change it. It doesn't change a word, but it's very important for the person you talk about. Because you always want to stay in contact with the person you write about. And the 7th step is promotion. So tweet and Facebook your story. If you're an investigative journalist, you have a goal, I told you. You want the story to come into this daily news circle. So don't be shy to promote your work. Send it to other colleagues. Send it to the people you were talking to. Send them a copy. It's very important. When I work with other journalists and I give them an interview, I'm very happy if they send me a copy of their work. So we have this haptic feeling. It's not only in the web. Here's a link. Send them the CD or a stick with the piece, because they can keep it in their pocket and in the tables, and they're happy that they were part of a journalistic project. So when you call them again, they remember. And follow up. This is one of the most important things. Never stop this story. So then tell it. I told you, Karl-Heinz Grasser, we started 2003 with this story, or 2002, and we always followed up. Sometimes your colleagues say, well, it's boring, another Grasser story, I can't listen anymore. But try to find a new angel to follow up your story. The readers love it normally. So, this was old school. We have 15 minutes left. or more? Do you want to pose questions, because I was a little bit too long, or we start with New School? New School. Okay, New School. New School, Panama Papers. What I showed you now was the story of going out, trying to make a structure in your work. This is something completely different. The Panama Papers, I have to say these PowerPoint files were made by my colleague Jakob Weichenberger from ORF, so it's not my presentation. But what I can tell you about is, what I told you now was investigative journalism, the investigative journalist as a lonesome wolf who tries to find a story, who takes the information, puts it in his pocket, wants to have time, and he's a very silent person. He talks to people, to policemen, to experts, to witnesses, to doctors, but he never would go to another journalist and talk to another journalist about the story. So investigative journalists in news companies are normally the lonesome wolves sitting in a corner and doing a very silent work. This is something completely different. This is a story about collaboration, about connecting hundreds of journalists. How does it start? A guy from Süddeutsche Zeitung called me. I knew him from a conference on one of these information barrier reefs. He was Frederick Obermeier. He will be here on May 19th. There will be a discussion here in this room about the Panama Papers. And Frederick Obermeier called me and said, well, we have a stick with 2 terabytes of data, and we want to investigate the story. Do you want to be part of an investigative team from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists in Washington? I said, yes, of course, because we are a big company. We have hundreds of journalists. And I said, yes, I will do it. And what is happening there, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists call you via Skype. You have a short interview where you show them your work, your breaking news, and you have to sign a letter of understanding where you tell them that you don't share the information with other people and that you respect the deadline that was organized by all journalists and that you quote the Süddeutsche Zeitung. This is all of them. So we didn't have to pay anything, we didn't have to penalties, something like this. So then you are part of this project. And this project had the name Prometheus, because one of the data journalists is a Star Trek fan, so they called it Prometheus. And we saw that it is impossible for one single news organization to examine those 2 terabytes of data. So what the ICIJ, this International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, this is a kind of, you have to see it like an NGO or a think tank, they organized with the Süddeutsche Zeitung a meeting with around 100 journalists in Munich, which was very secretly held in the roof of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and we learned how to research in huge data. I always said I'm only used to work with doc files and PDF. This is all I can. So what we decided were we need specialists. We need computer specialists, people who are able to work with Excel files, with CSV files, who can do, we call it a batch search. So they make huge lists with persons and organizations, and they put these lists to a database, and the database is responding, and don't ask me, it's very complicated. But we saw very quickly that the normal old school techniques that I showed you before are not working anymore. So you have to be a technician to understand those databases. What did we get? We had 11.5 million documents, 4.8 million emails, 3 million DB files, 2.1 million PDFs, and 1 million TIFF files. TIFF files, it was just copies of old documents from the 70s. So what we got was a database of a lawyer's office which went back to the 70s, and it was nearly impossible to read all this stuff. So what, maybe to have it graphically, you can see the difference. This was Panama Leaks. This was Swiss leaks, Luxembourg leaks, offshore leaks, which was a huge story. The Cablegate WikiLeaks was those 1.7 gigabytes. So just to have an imagination how big this data was. So what did the ICRG do to get through this stuff? They coded 2 platforms. One platform was a kind of Google, and the other platform looked like Facebook. This Google thing was called Blacklight, and it looked like this. We got a password for it that was protected. So what we did, you put in a name. In this case, the first word we put in was Austria, and then you get results. In this case, 19,265 results of Austria. And then you start to dig into this material. The problem was that it was too much material. So what we did is we made batch searches. So, for example, we took all names of all politicians and put it in this slot. Or we took all area codes of Austria and put it in the slot. This was the most successful search because we found out that there's one area code of Dornbirn or Bregenz where there were a lot of documents with the area code of Bregenz in it. And this is where the Hypo Vorarlberg resided. So we found out that the Hypo Vorarlberg had a lot of business with this company, Mossack Fonseca. So we tried to be creative in searching this huge database. The things we found looked like this. This is, for example, the email from Lionel Messi, where he was signing his offshore company. So you find documents that look like this, and then we try to dig in and find the stories. This is how a batch search looks. This was the area code batch search. So you have the area codes and the names of the cities. You put it into this database, and the database gives you the results. And then when you have these results, you go to the second platform that was coded by the ICRG. This is the Facebook. It's called iHub. It looks like this, where you have forums, groups, and conversations and news feeds. So every journalist who is part of this project can make a Facebook update. Well, he says, well, I found a document where Putin is mentioned in. Hi guys from Russia, can you read this? And then the Russian guys come and they said, well, this guy we know, we already wrote a story about him. Here you have the documents, and they put it on the links file, for example. So there were news groups and forums that were specialized in special topics. There was the Putin group and the Assad group and the Karl-Heinz Gasser group and the Austrian politicians group. And so people from 400 journalists started to share their findings, and suddenly we found out little stories. And there was another program we used. It's called Linkurious, which is a very interesting program because it's a visualization of a database. So you can find, for example, when you type in a company name, this program shows you where this company is connected to other companies. So you see those. I cannot show it to you because you need a password and I cannot use it here. But there was a company called Sequoia, for example. This was a company in Liechtenstein who had a lot of oligarchs, and they had their bank accounts in Austria. And with this program, we could find out where this company was connected to other companies. Sometimes it looks very, very magic. This is how you can find out where are the most important companies in this database. And at the end, one colleague made a graphic. It's like this. This is the whole database. This is Mossack Fonseca and all his companies who were registered there. So this is a kind of galaxy of the offshore underworld. This is investigative journalism 2016. So you see, this is how the future of journalism looks like. It's very beautiful. You can print it and put it on the wall. Yeah, this is. I was trying to explain you Panama Papers in 10 minutes. I hope everything was clear. We have 5 minutes left for questions because I have to go out here, I think, in 1 hour.
I'm sorry, I have one question. So Google and Facebook, they know all about your work? Or aren't you afraid of being hacked or anything?
No, because when I get in contact to people who are in danger, I climb down the tree of high technology, and I meet those people at cafes or far away. So I don't email with those people. Or when I email, I use my PGP or a Hashmail email, so you cannot hack it. Of course, you can hack my computer, but you won't find my sources there. No, because you only can enter iHub with a special password, and we have the Google Authenticator, so you have a special password who is only functioning for about 30 seconds. So I don't think you can hack it. But maybe one of the journalists is a special agent of the CIA. You never know. Yeah. How is it? The ICRJ, it's funded by some organizations like the Soros Foundation or the Ford Foundation. There are special donors. You can look it up at the page at the website of ICRJ. So they are publicly funded. Our editors were paid by the Falter, but we could use the infrastructure of the ICRJ. So we could use a global desktop if you want. Yeah? This was the benefit we had, that we could use an infrastructure and a database that we never could code because it's really expensive, and they had a know-how how to do it. So this is the big chance of collaboration. Yeah? So it's like a collaboration between hacktivism and journalism. Yeah?
One question concerning to the technicians you used in this conference at the Süddeutsche Zeitung. How dangerous is it to bring in people which are basically not journalists, basically not involved with stories? Basically, how can you trust them? How do you look for this kind of technicians? How can you get sure that they don't bring the material, sell it, whatsoever?
We did it because we made a collaboration with the technicians of the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, and these are the most. No, actually, our
simply the best.
Our star was Günther Haag. You maybe know him, and Jakob Weichenberger, who are two excellent data journalists. And this whole project would never have happened without those two guys, because they know how to handle those databases. I never did, and I don't want to learn it. I confess, yeah? Because I only work on PDFs. No, and for me, the interesting thing is that a collaboration, or the future of investigative journalism, is differentiation between the jobs. So you have a storyteller, you have a reporter, you have a kind of digital researcher. You have to form teams, but not teams of 5 journalists, but teams of people with completely different skills. And this is completely different to the old school style I showed you, where you walk around like a wolf and you try to find experts and interview them secretly. But I think both worlds have to exist together. It's not old, it's like the traditional world and the new world.
You already told us that, I'm here. You already told us that by your reputation, doors open too, because people know what
close.
you're doing. Yes, and that is my question.
Yeah.
What do you do when doors close in front of you just because they know who you are?
It depends on the story. Yeah? Sometimes when you walk a floor, every door closes and say, well, the journalists come, close your door. Yeah? But sometimes one door opens and says, come in, I have to show you something. Yeah? It depends if there is a whistleblower. It depends if somebody is fed up. Yeah? I wrote a big piece on the Brunnenmarkt murder this week, and the police was really fed up because in the daily news line, everybody blamed the police that they didn't do anything. And there was this policeman standing there, and he said, well, we did a lot. So what I try now is to tell him, okay, you tell it to me, can you show it to me on a paper trail? So get the papers, get the documents. This is very important, because people outside only trust you if you have the document. So I got this email where this person were informing the state prosecutor.
I see. There's another question.
How do you deal with the possibly psychological pressures of one, not trusting anybody, and two, maybe being followed, or having this that someone is watching you because you want to uncover things that shouldn't, or someone doesn't want to be uncovered?
I didn't really get that.
I usually investigative journalists I meet have a lot of psychological pressure. It's difficult not trusting, mostly because you mentioned investigative journalists do not trust people. So, and then also they are possibly watched by other people. They have to hide their sources, things, and protect everybody.
I
That's
think it's
a lot of stuff to deal with.
I think it's quite easy, because when a person tells you a story, the first question you tell this person is, how can you prove it? Do you have any documents? Do you have any pictures, any videos? Can you prove it? So it's a very technical relationship. I always try not to get involved personally or to make a moral decision about the person who's talking to me. It says, you have an information, you want to share it with me, how can you prove that this information is objective or not? And this is this here, and you have to completely set it apart from your personal goal. And one of the biggest mistakes we do is to get too close to the person to give us the information, to get friends with them, even for the good cause. So I also try not to come too close to victims, for example. I have the same goals like the victim, but I don't want to be friend with a victim. And I know a lot of journalists who are too close to those people, and then sometimes you take the wrong exit in the story.
Are there any more questions?
Yes?
Ulrike.
Besides your own reputation, does your organization do something to, attract whistleblowers? Because somehow there is a competition to get the better whistleblower. You know what I mean? Is there some technical, special security offer, or is there some ethical thing you can? You're famous for.
Normally, when you have news organizations who don't do investigative journalists, they think you just have to sit in your office and the whistleblowers come and give you the material. But it's not working like this. But the material you get from those whistleblowers are like two guys from a village who were fighting for a little piece of land and nobody's interested, or like private stuff, divorces and things like this. No, you have to get outside and find the whistleblowers. It's in 99% of my stories. I go to the whistleblowers. I try to find a whistleblower.
Yeah, but the huge stories in the last months, of course, the whistleblowers came to the publishers, especially the data-driven.
That's what
stories.
they tell us. I don't know if it's really true. Maybe. Yeah. But let's just imagine this database, this Panama database. It also can be a policeman, and maybe the journalist of the Süddeutsche Zeitung drank a lot of Bavarian beer with this policeman. He gave it to them. Yeah? You never know. So, from my experience, it's very, very, very seldom that a person comes to you offering you information.
Right, they call you and offer information.
Yeah, but it's not working like this. You have to find it, because when it would be like easy like this, everybody would have investigative journalists.
Yeah, right.
You have to find those people, and you have to, like what I told you with the lawyers, you have to find the people who have access to a file, then you have to find a lawyer who is helping this person. You get the files, you read it, you go to the policeman, you try to talk to them, you have to be very confident, and it's often a very, very thick wall of concrete you have to drill in.
Would you continue an investigation if you were scared for yourself, like if it had to do with the mafia or some?
I have to say, Austria is a safe place. It's a safe haven. So I've never been attacked or intimidated by anybody. Maybe it's different in, I don't know, Russia or in southern Italy. It depends on the story, I would say. If you risk
your
life.
teacher that you talked about, your teacher that you mentioned, I think he was American or something. Is there any a rule where you say don't ever cross that line, or?
No, I mean, if you really come into a dangerous situation, then I would stop, or if my but so I'm not a hero, yeah, but the problem is that you don't see this line, yeah. When you step over this line, it's too late, yeah. So.
Yeah, that's good practical advice.
Of course, it would be different for me to work for Novaya Gazeta than for Falter. Yeah? So, and it was interesting to see the guys in the Panama project, to see the guys from Russia. Yeah? They were real heroes, yeah? Because they really risked their lives. Because when you mess up with Putin, we know what happened then. Yeah? We just mess up with the Hypo Vorarlberg. Okay, they don't. This is not really a danger. Yeah?
All right. If there are not any pressing issues and questions, then we have a coffee break coming up. You are invited in the next room to have a coffee with us.
Yeah, excuse my bad English, but it's 20 years ago that I studied in the Netherlands and I had fluent English, so I sometimes...
It's above average, I can tell you. No offense. Okay, thank you very much, Florian Klenk.